Here with Bailey Caldwell. Bailey is the Director of Professional Services for RightScale. Welcome to Australia, Bailey.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, so you're aware of the environment provisioning automation project that we're doing with one of our large clients at the moment, where we're literally taking over 100 applications, a complex environment, and being able to, with the push of a button, provision that into either a private cloud or a public cloud. To what extent are we are seeing that sort of use case in the market?
Yeah, so you've given me some details on this particular client, and I think what's interesting about it is the all-in nature of it. A lot of adoption cycles, as we talked about earlier, start with dev test, put your toe in the water, make sure it works, and then evolve from there into CI and CD. I think obviously they had to have done some toe in the water like experimentation to get to the point where they are, but clearly your team has done a great job bringing them very fast from, hey, we think there's an opportunity for us in this cloud world to improve our agility, right? I mean, that's ultimately what it's about, to saying it's actually so good that we're going to pretty much put the whole company and all our assets from a software and IT perspective into a cloud model. So I think that's, it's unique in the context of how you've actually done it. It's not unique in the context of people's desire. There are a lot of companies that will say, we're all in on cloud and we're cloud first across the board. Actually delivering on that once they get into the trenches becomes a much more difficult challenge. And it relates to what we were talking about earlier with regards to where is Australia in the adoption cycle of cloud. Many businesses out of the US that I've worked with directly have been all in on cloud for years and they're still not there. And I think that's part, their appetite was larger than their ability to execute. It's also the reality that technology changes so quickly that whatever approach they might have picked 4 or 5 years ago, let's take Zynga for example, where they built their own private cloud, they pulled everything off Amazon. Well, now they're pushing everything back to Amazon because they don't want to recapitalize that asset in their private data center. So the life cycle of technology still exists, right, in a cloud world.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good point too. It's about protecting the capital expenditure of the past too, and continuing to get use out of it, which is one of the things I really like about the RightScale platform.
Yeah.
With the, in Australia, the majority of private clouds are utilising VMware. Mm-hmm. So we can put the RCAV onto that VMware cloud, bind it to the RightScale account, and give the client the benefit of being able to provision in an automated fashion into both public and private cloud. That's awesome capability that I think will be one of the big use cases in Australia as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, just to kind of take off of that point with regards to competitive landscape, I mean, if you're a CIO right now, it's a difficult circumstance. I mean, I would argue it's probably harder now than it ever has been because your ability to control the assets you're responsible for is completely different than it was 10 years ago. As a CIO, which you've been, you used to build a data center, and sure, you might have outsourced providers and contractors working on it, but ultimately, you owned the outcome of that solution. In a hybrid cloud ecosystem, your ownership and the way it gets delivered is vastly different than it used to be. You're going to be relying on not a handful of vendors, not a dozen of dozens of technologies, but hundreds of technologies in this ecosystem. And so you really have to challenge your own organizations and your thought process to move away from controlling every outcome to actually dealing with a massively heterogeneous environment that's just exploding. It's not going to get any simpler in the next 5 years. It's going to get more complex.
I completely agree. The complexity is rising, and that's probably a really good segue into a question around where I see one of the real strengths of RightScale is that is governance in a multi-cloud environment.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's, years ago we were very focused on this thing called a server template and making a virtual machine a SQL server or a MySQL server. And I think, we forked a newer version of Chef. We did a ton of work with bash scripts and PowerShell and configuration management approaches. That's now an industry unto itself. You have Salt, Ansible, Chef, Puppet. I mean, back then it was Puppet and that was it. Chef was a brand new player on the block. So we've extracted our platform further away from having an opinion about how something becomes a SQL server. You can certainly use RightScale, you can use Ansible, Salt, Chef, whatever. We happen to use Chef, and much more into caring about the overall continuum and the governance factors that you described. So the way I like to think about RightScale and how we've started marketing is this concept of universal cloud management, from bare metal to containers and everything in between, provisioning platform as a service, provisioning Rancher and Docker and clusters around containers as well as virtual machines is really the ecosystem you're operating within. And then you add to that self-service and plugins and all the other HTTP services out there that you may want to interact with. I think we've hit a good sweet spot in the market that we can build more and more capability on.